Obviously, the I have to cover the '08 to 2015 or 2014. The '08 to 2014, I actually don't have any experience with. I rode these bikes a lot in '06 and '07, and then I jumped on the four-stroke bandwagon for a few years, and didn't really get back into them until just a few years ago. So I don't have a lot of experience with the '08 to 2014. I know it's, if you take the two bikes and you look at the settings I gave you for the '06 and '07 and look at the settings that I just gave you for the 2015 to 2021, you can kind of trend it and see what's happening there. Somewhere along the line, they didn't use as much high speed, or didn't need as much high speed compression on the rear, and somewhere along the line there, it didn't need as much rebound on the forks. That in 2015 they changed the forks, but I don't know if 2014 it still needed 4 clicks. I don't know. So that's where you're gonna have to experiment if you have one of them bikes in between them years of 2008 to 2014. Now I'm going to discuss consistency and changes. Like, let's say you ride several different tracks. You have a hard pack track you ride, and then a soft terrain track you ride. Should you change the settings between track to track? How do you feel about that? How do I feel about that? Um, I'll tell you how my take on it. I prefer to keep the bike as consistent as I can, no matter what track I'm on. I will make some small changes when necessary, if it's pretty extreme difference. But I don't like to change the bike too much, because if I get squirrely and the bike gets out of hand, I'm going to rely on what I know about that bike. My memory of how that bike handles when it kicks this way or it bounces that way. How my memory of how the bike responds to certain things, that's going to play a huge role in my body positioning to just keep the bike on two wheels. So if I change the track real dramatic, I mean, if I change the suspension settings real dramatically just because I went to a different track, it's also going to act dramatically different when it does something stupid. And so I keep that in mind. And safety is my number one concern when riding dirt bikes, because I want to ride every weekend. So, um, so I usually try to keep the bike pretty close, and I just get familiar with the bike. If I have to change my body positioning for the track or something of such, I'll do that to the best of my ability. I try not to change the bike too much from track to track unless I have to. And when I do, it's very minor. Like, it might be just a little bit of a low speed compression change on the forks or something like that. It's not going to be anything too dramatic, so that I really change the way the bike handles when things get ugly. I want to keep the way it handles when things get ugly familiar to me, and by keeping the settings close to what I've been running week in and week out, even though I'm at a different track, that will achieve keeping the bike familiar to me when things get ugly, and I'll know what the bike's going to do. And honestly, even the pros are like that too. Once they get a good setup, they stay close to that range. As far as from the information I've gathered, they stay pretty close to that range. I mean, you will see them run into the pits during practice and make quick changes. They'll have their mechanic make a change in the forks, the shock, or something like that. But a change for them can be really small, because they don't get the same suspension that we get. One click on our bike of compression is, it would take like 3 or 4 clicks in their bike to get as big of a jump. Their bike does changes in much smaller increments, so that they can actually fine tune it a little bit tighter. And so when you see them rush in to make a quick change or whatever, you don't just assume that they're making a big change. It might be very minor, and sometimes minor change is all you need. And then, of course, after I get a bike set up where I really feel like it's good. Let's say I got it set up to go around the track, and a certain track or tracks that I ride, and I got it set up really good. I think it's good. Next thing I like to do is take it to the roughest track or place that I know. The place that just takes the most out of you, as far as, like, it just kicks your ass. For me, over here in Florida, I go to Croom. I go to the pit in Croom. That, if you ever been there before, that pit, they call it the motocross training pit or whatever. That is the roughest crap there is. I didn't see it for myself, but I heard rumors that Ricky Carmichael used to practice out there all the time when he was a little kid on the 85 or 80. back then, and I've talked to old timers that were out there like, yeah, that kid used to come out here and just rip. And when I see him, how fast he is outdoors and how good he was able to ride, and then I go out to that pit and I practice and train out there, I'm like, I think that's where he learned a lot of them skills, because that place is just rough. And big whoops everywhere, rockers, big rockers everywhere, not a smooth place around that pit, but you get a nice little track going. The point is, I take the bike to the roughest place that I can think of, and I see if there's any weaknesses in the bike's overall stability, and I address that, because it might not show itself at the track. When, you know, tracks, they groom them, they get rough, you know, they do, but then they groom it again, you know, and it might not show itself right away if there's like some hidden instability in the bike. So you have to get it to the roughest track, or the roughest section, the roughest place you can get it to, and really test the bike out and see if there's anything ugly that could stick its head out. And I'll give you a quick example. This bike right here, I set it up at some tracks over here. Thought I had it really good. I was riding it for about two months or so, and then I took it out to Croom, into the pit, and instantly I kind of caught on. I think my rear end might be too high. I might want to lower the rear end a little bit, which, you know, numerically means increasing your rider sag. And so I made some changes. It didn't take much. I only had to spin this thing like, I think about a half a lug to lower the rear end, and bam, it completely fixed that issue. It made the bike so much more stable when I was really trying to blitz them big whoops and rockers and like fourth gear. It was a night and day difference, and I would have never noticed that on the track until it kicked me off the bike, and then you would have thought you just made a mistake when it kicked you off the bike and you ended up in the dirt, when the truth was there was a hidden weakness in my suspension and I didn't know about it. And so what I did is, after I set it a little bit softer, next time I went to the track, I wanted to make sure that didn't change anything else. So next time I went to the track, I paid attention to see if there was anything that jumped out at me that I didn't like, since I've just changed something. And everything felt good. That little change didn't affect anything, so that I can notice. And at least I had the peace of mind knowing that, man, this thing can handle the roughest now. The roughest of the roughest. It can handle it without doing anything stupid. So after you get the bike fully set in, find the roughest place you can find, and do this for safety, because you want to make sure this bike can handle the nastiest stuff that you plan on throwing at it. Even if it hits you unexpectedly one day, you want to just check that the bike's going to do the best that it can do. And that's the only way you're going to be able to find out, is by sending it through the ringer on some really rough stuff and see what it does for you, and if there is any weaknesses that you just couldn't find while you were going around the track tuning it in. Yeah, I think that's it for the suspension stuff. Now I'm going to give you a few I don't know what you call them, tips or whatever, just some stuff that I had as I was thinking about what I was going to, how I was going to close out this series. Some things that often people overlook. I'll start with the wheels. The weight of the wheels. Weight of a wheel makes a big difference. Heavy duty inner tubes are heavy. They do last longer. They don't pinch as easy. I understand that. But they weigh a lot, and it's different than the weight that goes on the motorcycle. The weight that's on the bike is on-sprung weight. I mean, it's sprung weight. The weight that's on your wheels is on-sprung weight. That's what's touching the ground. But even worse, it's spinning on-sprung weight. And let me show you what I mean by that. All right, I have this wheel right here, just a KX85 wheel, and I stuck an axle in it. I've stuck an axle in it. And what you're going to notice is right now I'm having to hold it on one end. I'm having to grip it pretty good to hold the weight of the wheel up. But as soon as I start spinning it, you'll see that I'll be able to let go in here and only hold like one finger, and it will stay like this. It's not going to this end's not going to fall down. And the reason being is because of the gyro effects of the wheel spinning. It actually holds it in axis. And watch this. Do it again. Oh, come on. Alright, so you see how the wheel was able to hold itself up even though I was only holding one end? What that shows is that when this wheel is spinning, it kind of, there's a gyro effect that happens, and your wheels are the same way on your bike. When they get spinning, there's a gyro effect that happens, and that works to your advantage and also your disadvantage. It works to your advantage because it does bring stability in the bike. Like when you jump the bike in the air, it keeps it from getting all weird and stupid. If you ever jump and hit the front brake in the air, you'll notice the front end gets really silly until you land. It can almost just veer off and get silly, just interesting enough though, you can hit the back brake in there, pulling the clutch. Obviously you don't want to stall the bike while you're in there, but pulling the clutch and hit the back brake in there and drop the front end, and the bike still stays pretty stable, I guess because it's the trailing end. But you hit that front brake in the air and it gets unstable in the air and gets silly. It needs that front wheel spinning. So weight on your wheels, it does help with stability, but at the same time it works against you because it does also make the bike a little bit harder to drop it in the corners. It can make the bike feel heavy in the air, especially if you're trying to do like whips and scrubs and stuff. If you got real heavy wheels, like your Tusk wheels are pretty heavy. People like to buy the aftermarket Tusk wheels, and them things weigh a lot. And then they'll throw heavy duty inner tubes in. After you throw all that weight on it, the whole bike will feel heavier. Even though it might, on a scale, it might only weigh a total of 3 pounds heavier, it's going to feel like you put 20 pounds on that bike because it's spinning weight. Same with sprockets here, aluminum sprockets. You know, stick with aluminum. The steel is heavy and it's spinning. Anything that's spinning, you want to keep the weight off of it. Tires too. Weigh your tires. See what you got. See how heavy they are, how light they are. There are some heavy tires out there, and there are some lighter tires out there. I do like the Geo Max myself. They're the best bang for the buck. And there are better out there. I'm quite sure of that. There's better tires out there. But the Geo Max are fairly light, and you get good traction with them. And they do well. They have nice, good, soft sidewalls and stuff. But anyway, you want to keep the weight off the wheels. So I just use standard inner tubes. I don't use heavy duty, maybe 2mm thickness max. And I just replace them every time I go to do the tire, because they do get abrasion after a while, especially if you run a proper air pressure. I'm currently running on this bike about 10 psi. I used to run about as low as 9, but I currently run 10. On a 450, I'll run 11, just to keep from pinching the inner tubes and stuff. I do like to run a little bit of a lower pressure. I don't feel as much of the ripples going up the face of a jump. The bike kind of, you know, if there's like little ripples and kicks on the jump, you won't feel them as much with lower pressure. Almost makes them invisible. And so that's my reasoning for choosing a lower pressure like that. But I don't have a problem getting flats, even with your standard inner tubes, as long as I change the inner tube every time I change the tire. And then that allows me to keep the weight off the wheels, and keep, you know, again, aluminum sprocket, regular inner tubes, lightweight tires. The bike's going to feel lighter overall. And obviously they have these little, this is where we really start OCD in it here. Okay, yeah. You see the little yellow mark right here? That they claim that's the heavy end of the tire. And if you read the instructions on tires, they'll say to put that where the valve is at. But that's more for cars or bikes that don't have rim blocks. The heaviest part on this tire right here, this whole wheel and the back, is where the rim block is at. So you want to put this yellow dot actually where the rim lock, because that's the heaviest, I mean that's the lightest part of the tire, the yellow dot. You want to put that close to the rim lock, and that'll keep everything kind of balanced out, at least a little bit closer to being balanced. And then this is not really so much suspension or handling related, or maybe it is. Handlebars, the width. You put the grip on right here, and the grip slides all the way on until it touches a bar. On this side, you put it on and it slides all the way on until it touches the throttle tube. If your bars haven't been trimmed and you slide them on, and you have these marks that they put in here, centered out so that your handlebars are centered left and right. If you take a measuring tape and you measure from, like, let's say from right here to right here, or right here, and from right here to right here, or right here, basically, I like to do it like this. I measure from here to the center of this bolt, and here to the center of that bolt. You'll notice that the number is greater on this side, meaning that this grip is a little bit further out than that grip, and that's because of the thickness of the throttle tube. So what I like to do is measure, after I center this out perfectly, I like to take that measurement, then I'll pull this off and I'll trim a little bit of the side of the handlebar off, put it back on, and check that, and I'll keep doing that until it's equal. And I'm not the only one that does that. I forgot the pro racer's name, but his mechanic on a video I seen on YouTube, he mentioned that his rider was real picky about that he had to have them equal, or the rider would assume that the handlebars were bent or the front end was tweaked. But that's just something to consider when you're setting your bike up, so that try to keep things all nice and equal and stuff. Alright, and lastly, suspension servicing. How often should you have your suspension fluid changed? What suspension fluid should you use? And everything like that. It's like everything with these bikes. It depends on the rider. I know for me, I like to do mine at about every 30 to 40 hours. I definitely don't like to run them any longer than 40 hours. By 30 hours, I can often start to feel the suspension fading, especially if it's like in the summertime months. It'll just start feeling a little bit softer and not as much dampening, both rebound and compression. It'll just kind of start feeling a little bit softer overall, and that kind of indicates to me that I'm due for a freshening up. My wife, on the other hand, since she rides slower than I do, I can run her suspension for maybe like 70 hours or so, because she just doesn't really wear into the fluids like I do. She doesn't get the suspension as hot, and she doesn't stroke the suspension as far, and she just doesn't pound the bike like I do. I always like to do them equal, so I'm not going to service just the forks and not the shock, and I'm not going to service just the shock and not the forks, because anytime you service them, you will ramp back up the dampening. You'll feel it, and it usually doesn't affect your settings, because it does it across the board, all your dampening across the board, so it just kind of freshens it up, makes it feel like a new bike again. But so you oftentimes you don't really have to go change your settings just because you freshen up the fluid. But it's important to do, but balance is more important than anything else. So you want to do front and rear together, so you just keep things balanced. I have noticed they kind of do age similarly. Like, as the back end starts fading, I notice the front end starting to fade too. So they kind of age about the same rate. So, when I go to freshen up, I just do both the front and the rear, because I want to keep things balanced. And another good reason to have your suspension serviced is even just nitrogen pressure. If some people just check their nitrogen and add it when it's low, but it's low for a reason. It's not escaping from here. I promise you that. What happens is there's just a rubber bladder in here, and it's full of nitrogen. It's keeping the oil separated from the nitrogen, obviously, so that's what the rubber bladder does. But when you fill it up with nitrogen, the manual says 147 psi. I just put on the 150. It's got 150 psi in here, with the oil being compressed by the nitrogen pressure of the bladder. But the shock, it has a seal on it, and even though it shouldn't be leaking and they don't leak, it does keep the shaft clean and kind of wet, and that does cause a oil loss through time. Small amount, but it does lose oil through time just by lubing the shaft and keeping it clean. There's a little bit that does slip past the seal and it gets stuck in the little crevices of the metal of the shaft and stuff. That does happen. So as that happens, you lose oil inside the shock. As you lose oil inside the shock, the bladder is allowed to expand to take up that space, and as it expands, your nitrogen PSI drops. So that's really why you're having a nitrogen PSI drop. If you check it, you find it low, you really just need to service your shock. It's really what it boils down to. So after I service my shock, I put it to 150 psi, and I don't worry about the nitrogen pressure until I service the shock again, because I understand that if it is getting lower, it's because I'm due for a service. And like I mentioned earlier, you want to record if you add oil on top of the oil that's already in here, the fluid in the outer chamber. You want to record how much you added, so that when you go to do your next service on your forks, you can put that exact amount in again, so you don't have to do all this testing all over again. Once I have a bike set up, I really don't have to test anymore. I might make changes down the road as the suspension kind of wears in. Some of the things that I found that I have to add throughout as things wear in, as the bike gets older and ages, I seem to find that I have to add a little more high speed. I'm talking about the smallest amount, and that's these lines that you see right here. And just to keep track, just to keep it the feel that I'm wanting as it kind of ages. And I also find that as it ages, I have to add a little more on the spring. I'm talking the smallest amount more, just to keep that as the spring kind of gets, you know, a little bit shorter and more compacted just from usage. And and then in some bikes, I've had to do it with this one. It's at 100 hours now. You might have to add one more click low speed compression on it. Just as things age, just one click, maybe only one click on one fork, and maybe a click back here. But it's just one of the things, as it ages, you might have to add more of that. Interesting enough, I've never really found that I had to add more rebound as the bike ages. That kind of stays the same. Whatever rebound setting I fall on, it doesn't change as the bike ages. But it does seem like the low speed compression changes a little bit. Maybe it's because the shims are getting, you know, worn in. Maybe things aren't sealing as good inside. I don't know, but this is just my experience. When you do service the forks and the shock, this is the fluid that comes with them in them stock, KYB KC2. You can buy that from Rocky Mountain or anywhere. And this is S1 fork oil. This is what you use in the forks. They recommend inner and outer chamber to use that, and that can't go wrong with that. If you do use a different brand suspension fluid, whatever brand you use, you tune to that brand. And if you want to duplicate the same, if you don't want to have to run back through all your settings after you do a service, just make sure you use the same exact fluid you used last time. That way you don't have to go run back through all your settings, because once you get it right, if you're like me, once you get it right, you don't want to fool with it again. You like consistency. I like to ride, so I want to go to the track and just put it on the track after I service my suspension without having to make any changes. I want it to fall right back into place, but just feel fresh again. And then this is my own mix. I don't suggest this unless you want to try it, but this is what I do. See that? Automatic transmission fluid, synthetic, Mobil 1. I use that on the outer chamber of the forks here, and I use the S1 on the inner chamber. And I learned this off a guy off Thumper Talk years ago. I tried it out, and it felt so good. I've never stopped doing it this way. Here's how he explained it to me. He did suspension for a living, and he said he didn't do this to customers' bikes. Because they wouldn't understand. He only did this to his personal bikes. He explained it like this: this is hydraulic fluid. This is designed for mainly one thing. Its key purpose is to control the valving inside the inner chamber, to have the properties that it needs, anti-foaming properties, and the thickness and all that for the valving inside of the inner chamber on the forks. And he said, because of that, it's not the best for your seals. Not bad, but it's not the best, and it's not the best for your bushings. And that's what the oil in the outer chamber does. All the oil in the outer chamber does really is lube your bushings and your forks, and it keeps the seal nice and lubed, as well as, you know, the amount of oil used in the inner chamber controls your air spring, as they call it, or your bottoming resistance. But that's beside the point. So this does your valving and everything on the inner chamber, and then I use this for the outer chamber, because automatic transmission fluid does have properties for bushings and slide, bushings sliding across metal and stuff like that. They have that covered in the automatic transmission fluid, as well as seal conditioners. So what I found by running this was my forks on the outer chamber only, was my forks were smoother. Before I stumbled into this, someone turned me on to putting Rain-X on your fork tubes here and going out and riding, and I did notice it covered up some of the little bumps on the on the track. There is stiction, with the fork seals and the bushings. All you got to do is take the forks apart and move in, and you can feel there is stiction. And especially once you start applying force, like trying to push the front wheel back or forward, the stiction will increase. But this seemed to remove a lot of that friction, the stiction as I call it, and by using this on the outer chamber. You don't want to use this on the inner chamber, obviously, because it won't have the characteristics that is needed for the valving of the inner chamber. So that's where I use this on the inner chamber, and I use that on the outer chamber. Now some people say, well, at that point you'll have some mixture. I have found that my inner chamber fluid can come out a little bit red. The inner chamber is what I'm using this on, is clear fluid. I do notice it coming out a little bit red when I go to change it, so maybe there is a little bit of mixture, but that's after 30 hours, and it feels so good. I just can't change from this. But it also could just be the ink, because what makes transmission fluid red is they add an ink to it, and you know how ink is. Ink just kind of gets through everything. So it could just be the ink on the shaft of the inner chamber going in and out, just slowly bleeding into here. I really don't think it's like the fluid actually getting in. I think it's more of just the ink. But that's what I do. You might disagree with it, and that's fine. You know, everyone has their little magic mix, and that's my little magic mix. Oh yeah, a little thing to add on top of that with this. I don't know how long your fork seals last. I've been doing the automatic transmission fluid, synthetic automatic transmission fluid for, let's see, 17 years now. So I don't know any different, but I know these are the original fork seals. This bike's got over 100 hours on it. There's no leaks. Original fork seals. And I can usually get at least 150 hours out of a fork seal with no leaks. I've gotten as high as 200 hours without a single fork leak. And I don't know if it's from the synthetic automatic transmission fluid or not, but who knows. Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. I think I covered everything that I can cover as far as suspension tuning stuff. Yeah, I definitely appreciate you guys watching this. As you know, the video quality is pretty poor right now. I'm just using a cell phone. I'm going to invest in some better video equipment here shortly and try to figure out how to do some better video editing to be able to put some better videos together. But still, I appreciate you guys sitting through all this, and when I fumble through my words and everything, sorry about that. It's just I'm running this live and there's no editing at this moment. I'm hoping to take her out this weekend, and I just put new reed valves in her, new reed pedals, so hoping to test them out. And then a subscriber sent me an Apex head with both the MX dome and the XC dome, which is like your woods enduro off-road dome. I'm looking forward to testing them out this weekend if the weather permits. I don't know where I'm going to test them out, because we do have some rain coming in, so that really just depends on where the rain goes, and certain areas handle rain better than others. But if you enjoy this kind of stuff, please click like and subscribe. I'm going to keep them coming. I appreciate you guys watching, and have a good evening. Catch you later. See ya.